to hit, we have opened up what we call FedMall, which is an electronic marketplace at the Defense Logistics Agency, to small companies as well as state and local governments. So they can come in and buy PPE in our electronic marketplace. We continue to reach out as needed. Early on, we had some governors where we were concerned that certain critical facilities in their states were closed. They were very helpful. So now they know how to reach out to us as well. We were even reaching out, frankly, to our embassy in Mexico, open up facilities there as well.
So once you have all the safety requirements met and the things that make people confident and comfortable they can work, the other piece of this, which I think is particularly difficult for the defense industrial base, is people are teleworking. Right. And if they don't have to be in the facility, we're all working from home, whether it's Microsoft Teams or Zoom or something else. How has the department and the defense industrial base responded to that? If you're doing classified work, obviously you can't do that from home. But for those who can carry work, can the department support all that the broadband demands? What are you seeing on that front?
Yeah. So the demand signal was pretty intense, obviously, initially, and bandwidth was limited on a number of fronts. I will tell you, here at DoD, Dana Deasy, the CIO, and his team really stepped up to outfit everyone. They had incredible processes with people driving up in the Pentagon parking lot and handing them all kinds of equipment, and then they expanded our capability. So from an unclassified point of view, things got going pretty quickly, and everyone started becoming very proficient in how to telework and how to have, 100 people on a Zoom call or Microsoft Teams and begin to really connect. The classified part was a little trickier, but we actually have a lot of SIPR capability out with senior people as well. And then we've been rotating people into SCIFs to keep things going. And I will tell you, readiness has not stopped at all during this time. So really a shout out to everyone's huge effort. I think on the industrial base side, exactly the same thing. Everyone adjusted, learned, and I'll tell you, I have calls with CEOs. We've had Secretary Esper on 3 or 4 different calls now, and people are in their dining rooms and living rooms and home offices, and we all just kind of go with the flow.
Yeah, you watch CNBC and you basically get an insight to every CEO's living room or home office. Probably not the same for the Secretary of Defense or the Undersecretary of Acquisition. Just a couple more questions on the impact industrial base. Earlier in the crisis, you discussed a 3-month slowdown. How would you characterize the slowdown today in terms of the ability for the industrial base to produce, the defense production that's required?
We have made amazing inroads in coming back up to close to the prior productivity levels. 2 segments particularly impacted that still are showing a bit more of an impact are shipbuilding and aircraft production. And on the aircraft side of things, obviously, we have a lot of suppliers, prime contractors who are not pure defense contractors.
So pure play, you mean people who have, commercial and other, dual use businesses.
Exactly. So we have some aircraft suppliers who are defense only or pure play. Then we have other aircraft suppliers, dual use. So they are both supporting the commercial industry as well as defense. Those dual use providers have been particularly hard hit. And sometimes that's helpful to us because they've been able to shift resources over to our programs. We do have to make sure that they are right sizing because obviously we can't absorb all the overhead costs that would go full up dual use operation. So a lot of work going on, tough decisions being made, but we are pushing through it.
You mentioned dual use companies, a lot of companies that aren't pure play defense companies, they're doing business internationally and their supply chains are international as well. We've seen this throughout the COVID crisis. Almost COVID has done more to teach America about the vulnerabilities of our supply chain than any other matter. how do you see reliance on international supply chains, in particular China, impacting defense industrial base through this crisis?
This has, in a way, been the silver lining for us, because issues that we identified about 2 years ago in our 13806 report on the defense industrial base.
This is the executive order, right? That
came exactly.
Out 2 years ago, yeah.
Executive Order 13806, where we were tasked by the president to look at the defense industrial base, and we did that. One of the most useful things that came out of that was we segmented the base. We all had the same lexicon. Then we could identify fragilities, and we identified a lot of single source offshore supply chain critical items. So we have used that as a platform over the last couple of years to try to make sure that we strengthen that industrial base. COVID-19 brought all of that home, and it has allowed us, in sort of a twisted way, to accelerate those efforts. And not only for the rare earth elements or the microelectronics that we all know so well, but also for the advanced pharmaceutical ingredients that go into our drugs that obviously are important for the nation and also very, very important for DoD. So we've been able to really get that message out and, frankly, get a little bit more support from Congress and the administration to strengthen our domestic industrial base.
So you mentioned microelectronics. You also mentioned pharmaceutical. I mean, that was one of the eye-popping statistics that I think the whole country learned during COVID, is that I think when it comes to generic drugs, the ingredients over like 80+% come from China. How is the Pentagon getting ahead of the curve? And is that particular data point, generics and reliance on China, something that impacts the force, or is that a bigger civilian population?
It impacts both the force and the larger civilian population. And we, because of that, have been able to get a whole of government response. From a DoD point of view, we are very fortunate to have the Defense Production Act, particularly Title III, which allows us to take appropriated funds and make investments in the industrial base to increase both capacity and throughput. But it's also allowed us to shine a light on the fact that it's not only the infrastructure to produce all of these items, but having a regulatory environment that enables us to move through the safety and certification processes at a reasonable speed. That was part of why so many things moved offshore. We became onerous in terms of our regulations. And now we're coming back to, I think, really trying to adjudicate that and coming up with a reasonable set of standards.
Great. So you mentioned the Defense Production Act. That got a lot of play in the press earlier in the crisis when there was a shortage of masks and ventilators. The Defense Production Act seems to be the vehicle the President of the United States would use to make sure that these companies are producing, to help them produce, and in case they're not, to require them to produce, and the like. How do you see the DPA being used for the rest of this crisis and then in the future? Is the Defense Production Act a tool that now perhaps some thought was secondary, now is some kind of primary in the mind of an Undersecretary for Acquisition or Department of Defense, or the President of the United States going forward?
It is one very, very important tool in our toolkit, I would say. We have used it both for medical resources, whether that be N95 masks or whether it be swabs for testing. We have also used it for our own defense industrial base. So it's a very, very important tool, but it's only one. We, for about 5 weeks with our legal staffs, to find a way to reach into HHS, Health and Human Services, $17 billion that they received through the CARES Act, to be able to transfer money to DoD to enable us to do contracting on their behalf, as well as to investment in industrial capacity and throughput. So we have taken the $1 billion that we received for DPA Title III funding through the CARES Act. We've used a portion of that for medical resources, and then we've used another portion of that for our defense industrial base.
So you mentioned before semiconductors was a key vulnerability. That's been known in national security and defense circles for some time. It was a key area of focus. Previous administration, this administration with the national security strategy. To what extent is the Defense Production Act a vehicle, an authority you would use to help, in the case, let's say, Intel building a fab in Arizona? Also, recently, we had the announcement with Taiwan Semiconductor Company, also TSMC, coming to Arizona as well. There needs to be a variety of incentives for a company to do that. It's important, you would think, for national security to have a domestic kind of fabrication capacity for semiconductors, microelectronics. But is DPA a part of that, or is that authority too small, not funded enough to really impact that kind of problem that you have with microelectronics?
So DPA may be part of the solution. We have basically obligated about 2/3 of the money, the $1 billion we got through the CARES Act, and we have plans to get on contract the balance of that. We are hopeful there will be a tranche 4 coming along and a follow-on to the CARES Act. We have at OMB right now requests for more DPA Title III money. But I think the microelectronics challenge is even larger than that. And in fact, about 5 months ago, my team started a study to recharacterize the microelectronics industrial base, because it's a little bit difficult to understand, from foundries to packaging to logic to memory. Who are the players? Who are domestic? Who are offshore? And we have just finished a work internally that we are now beginning to socialize in the interagency throughout the government, saying we have a challenge in that the majority of the intellectual property associated with microelectronics is generated in the U.S., but the majority of the fabrication and packaging is done offshore. And that introduces risks to our supply chains and takes away from our economic security. So we are thinking about a whole number of private-public partnerships to bring more of that back here. One of the creative ways that we are looking at using DPA Title III is following up on an executive order that was signed out just about a month ago, a little over a month ago now, by the president, that basically gives the development